The cold in the Ashworth Keep was a living thing. It seeped from the gray stones and settled deep in the bones, a permanent chill that no fire could ever truly banish. For Ilara, it was the only home she had ever known. She moved through its halls like a phantom, her steps silenced by years of practice, her presence as unremarkable as the tapestries faded with age. Tonight the cold was sharper, a blade against her skin as she poured wine for her father, Lord Ashworth, and his guest. They did not look at her. They never did. To them, she was merely a pair of hands, a shadow that anticipated needs. But tonight, she was also the topic of their conversation. Her name was not spoken, but her existence was the ink on the contract being signed with every sip of wine. "The guarantee is sound," the visiting lord grunted, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Her bloodline, though diminished, is acceptable. The debt will be considered settled upon delivery." Her father inclined his head, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "She is compliant. She understands her duty." He said the words as if discussing a mare being sold at market. Ilara's hands did not tremble as she refilled the glasses. She had trained them not to, but inside her chest, her heart hammered a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She was a thing, a guarantee, a payment. Across the table, her sister Cora watched, her beautiful face a mask of detached pity. It was the look of someone watching a distant tragedy, grateful the flames were not touching their own house. Later, in the suffocating silence of the great hall, her father placed a hand on Cora's shoulder. Ilara, clearing the last of the plates, was close enough to hear his low murmur, words not meant for her, but that would define her. "It's a small sacrifice to ensure your brilliant future, my dear. She will understand her purpose." The words didn't break her. They simply confirmed what she had always known. Her purpose was to be used up, to be spent so that others might prosper. She was the silent coin, and her value was only realized when she was given away. That night, sleep was a distant country she could not reach. The moon, a sliver of ice in the black sky, offered no comfort. From her small window, she could see the flickering torchlight of a caravan in the main courtyard. The Lycans. They had been in the city for a rare diplomatic visit, their presence a source of fear and fascination for the townsfolk. Now, they were preparing to leave. The sounds of their departure, the stamp of hooves, the low growl of a language she didn't understand, the creak of heavy wagon wheels, should have terrified her. Instead, they sounded like an escape. It wasn't a plan. It was a primal, desperate surge of panic, a final rebellion of a soul that refused to be slowly extinguished in the cruel lord's bedchamber. Death at the hands of the feared Lycan king would be swift. A quick, violent end was a mercy compared to the slow, grinding death of spirit her father had arranged. She accepted that she was meant to be discarded. She would simply choose the hand that cast her away. She took nothing with her but the clothes on her back and a small, wooden wolf her mother had carved for her long ago. One of its ears was chipped, its form worn smooth by the anxious rub of her thumb over the years. It was a broken, worthless thing. A fitting token for a broken, worthless girl. Barefoot and silent, she slipped through the sleeping castle, a ghost, leaving the only tomb she had ever known. The air outside was bitingly cold, smelling of pine smoke and winter. She didn't run toward the gates, toward a freedom she couldn't imagine. She ran toward the largest, most imposing carriage, the one draped in black and silver banners. With a strength born of pure terror, she pried open a heavy chest of silks, strapped to the back, burrowing into the dark, fragrant folds. The lid slammed shut, plunging her into absolute blackness. Here, curled in the dark, she waited for the end. The carriage lurched forward, its movement a final jarring confirmation of her choice. She was no longer a guarantee or a payment. She was simply cargo, being carried toward her fate. The darkness in the chest was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket that smelled of exotic dyes and preserved silks. Ilara curled into a tight ball, her cheek pressed against the smooth, cool fabric, and waited. The rhythmic rocking of the carriage was the only measure of time, each lurch and sway carrying her further from the cold stone of Ashworth Keep and closer to an unknown end. She did not pray for salvation. She prayed for it to be quick. Then, the motion stopped. The sudden stillness was more terrifying than the movement had been. Shouts echoed from outside, the words guttural and sharp, a language of predators. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen presence. With a deafening crack, the lid of the chest was torn open. Blinding gray light flooded the space, and Ilara flinched, throwing a thin arm over her eyes. A silhouette blotted out the sky, a shape so immense it seemed to break the horizon. As her eyes adjusted, the shape resolved into a man. No, not a man, a king. He was a monolith of muscle and scars, his height so vast he had to stoop to peer into the chest. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, and a deep scar cut a pale line through one dark eyebrow, giving him a look of permanent severity. Behind him, other figures drew closer. Massive warriors with hands on the hilts of their swords, their teeth bared in silent snarls. The air crackled with their hostility. This was it, the end she had chosen. The giant king raised a single leather-gloved hand. The growling stopped. The tension in the air did not lessen, but it became focused, controlled, all of it emanating from him. He knelt, the motion slow and deliberate, the leather of his armor groaning. It was a gesture of such unexpected grace it stunned her. He was bringing himself down to her level, lessening the terrifying chasm of height between them. His eyes, she saw now, were the color of molten amber, glowing with an inner fire that seemed to see straight through her skin and into the frantic, terrified beating of her heart. His voice, when it came, was not a shout but a low rumble that vibrated in her bones. "You're not shivering from the cold." It was an observation, not a question. Ilara could not find her voice. It was trapped in her throat, a knot of pure terror. He saw her not as an assassin, not as a stowaway, but as something else, something frightened. She finally managed to force out a whisper, the words brittle and thin, the creed she had lived by her entire life. "I am just a payment, a mistake." She closed her eyes, ready for the killing blow. It did not come. Instead, she felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the world was holding its breath. The king's large hand extended toward her, palm up. It was not a hand to grab or strike, but to offer. His amber eyes burned with an intensity that was not anger, but something far more profound, a raw and ancient reverence that left her breathless. "They treated you as a coin to pay a debt," he said, his voice a quiet thunder that drowned out the world. "To me, you are the treasure their debt could never afford." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. Treasure. Her, the worthless silent coin. He saw the chipped wood of the wolf figurine clutched in her hand. "They told you that you were broken." He reached forward, his calloused thumb gently tracing the chipped ear of the carving. "I see a survivor who refused to be shattered." Then he spoke a word, a title, that resonated with the force of a royal decree, sealing her fate in a way she could never have imagined. Mate. He lifted her from the chest as if she weighed nothing. His warriors stared, their shock plain on their hardened faces. But they said nothing. The king's word was law. He wrapped his own immense fur-lined cloak around her trembling shoulders. The warmth was immediate, a heavy, comforting weight that smelled of pine, leather, and snow. It was the first true warmth she had felt in years, a heat that sank past her skin and into the frozen core of her soul. He did not question her further. He did not demand an explanation. He simply lifted her onto his own massive black warhorse, placing her in the saddle in front of him. As the caravan began to move again, she was enveloped in his presence. His broad chest was a solid wall at her back, shielding her from the wind. His arms were a protective cage around her. The rhythmic, powerful gait of the horse was a steady heartbeat beneath them. For the first time in her life, Ilara was not invisible. She was the center of a king's attention. She was not a burden being transported, but a treasure being escorted home. The fear that had been her constant companion for 20 years began to recede, replaced by a bewildering, fragile sense of safety. She looked down at her hands, no longer trembling, and realized she was not being carried toward her end. She was being carried toward a beginning. The journey was a blur of motion and warmth, a dreamlike state from which Ilara never wanted to wake. The world beyond Kale's protective embrace was a wash of dark pines and endless snow, but inside the circle of his arms, she was shielded from it all. When they finally passed through a colossal gate of black iron and obsidian, the air itself seemed to change. The biting wind gentled into a soft breeze, carrying the scent of roasting meat, wood smoke, and something else. Something wild and alive. This was the Black Moon Citadel. It was nothing like the silent, decaying stone of Ashworth Keep. The citadel was carved into the heart of a mountain, a fortress of living rock and roaring fires. Torches burned in sconces, casting a warm golden light that danced on walls hung with rich furs and woven banners depicting a wolf howling at a silver moon. The sounds were overwhelming. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children chasing each other through the great hall, the low murmur of conversation from warriors gathered around long wooden tables. It was a place teeming with life, with power, with a sense of belonging that was so alien it made her ache. As Kyle dismounted, lifting her down as if she were made of spun glass, a hush fell over the courtyard. Every eye turned to them, but the gazes held no contempt, no pity. There was only a raw, undisguised curiosity. They looked at her, then at their king, and a silent understanding seemed to pass through the pack. His hand never left the small of her back, a silent, possessive gesture that declared her place to the entire world. He was their alpha. His choice was law. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes as sharp and kind as a hawk's approached them, bowing her head slightly to Kale. "My king," she said, her voice a warm contralto. "All is prepared." Kale's amber eyes met Ilara's. "This is Iona. She is the heart of my household. You will be safe with her." He spoke the word safe as if it were a sacred vow. Iona led Ilara away from the main hall, up a winding stone staircase to a set of heavy oak doors. The room beyond was larger than any Ilara had ever been allowed to enter. A fire crackled in a vast hearth, and the bed was a mountain of furs and soft wool blankets. But it was the bath that stole her breath, a deep steaming stone tub filled with water so hot it sent clouds of fragrant vapor into the air. Iona gently helped her out of her ragged, travel-stained dress, her touch firm but kind, without a hint of judgment. The water was a shock, a glorious, enveloping heat that seemed to melt away years of accumulated cold. Iona added herbs that smelled of lavender and pine, their scent rising in the steam. For the first time, Ilara wasn't washing in a basin of lukewarm water in a drafty corner. She was being cleansed, purified. As the grime of her old life washed away, it felt as though a physical weight was being lifted from her soul. Afterward, Iona wrapped her in a thick, soft towel and presented her with new clothes. Not a servant's rough-spun tunic, but a dress of deep forest green wool, so soft it felt like a caress against her clean skin. It was paired with supple leather boots lined with fur. She felt solid, real. Later, seated by the fire, a bowl of rich, hearty stew in her lap, Ilara watched the flames and felt a profound sense of dislocation. This comfort was not hers to have. It was a mistake, a temporary reprieve before reality set in. But when Iona returned and simply sat with her, not speaking, just sharing the quiet warmth of the fire, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout in the barren ground of her heart. Days turned into a week. Ilara's life found a new, quiet rhythm. She was no longer invisible, yet she was not forced into the spotlight. Kyle gave her space, but his presence was a constant, reassuring hum in the background of her life. He would find her in the library, where she lost herself in maps and histories, and simply sit across from her, his silent companionship a balm. He was learning her, she realized, studying the quiet lines of her face as she read, memorizing the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Her value, the purpose her father had always claimed she had, was revealed by accident. She had taken to standing in the shadows of the council room during Kyle's meetings, a silent habit she couldn't break. His war chiefs were arguing, their deep voices echoing off the stone. The dispute was over a border pact with a southern clan, a treaty nearly a century old. One of the lords, a massive gray-furred Lycan named Ulrich, slammed his fist on the table. "The treaty gives us rights to the river's north bank. They are in violation." From her corner, a small, hesitant voice emerged. "No," Ilara said, so softly she wasn't sure she'd been heard. The room fell silent. Every head turned to her. Kyle's gaze was intense, not angry, but encouraging. "The treaty," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence, "grants passage and water rights, but Article 4, Section 2 specifies that territorial claims end at the old fir tree, the one struck by lightning. The North Bank belongs to them." The silence was absolute. Ulrich stared at her, his jaw slack. How could you know that?" "I was there," she whispered, "when the human emissaries were discussing it with my father's scribes. I was serving wine. I remember the words." She recited the clause verbatim, her memory a perfect, flawless tapestry of overheard words and half-glimpsed documents. A slow smile spread across Cale's face, a look of such profound pride and awe that it made her chest tighten. He looked at his counsel, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. "It seems we have a new strategist. My queen is not just our heart, but our memory." From that day on, she was no longer a shadow in the corner. She sat beside him, his memory oracle, her quiet observations and perfect recall, becoming the most formidable weapon in his political arsenal. The pack's respect for her grew, their initial curiosity solidifying into a fierce loyalty. She was not just the king's mate. She was the keeper of their truths. One night, when the full moon hung in the sky like a silver medallion, Kyle led her by the hand to the highest battlement of the citadel. The wind was cold, but he stood behind her, a living shield, his cloak wrapped around them both. Below, the snow-covered forest gleamed, a world of silver and shadow. "For 100 years," he began, his voice a low murmur against her ear, "I have been king. I have known duty and battle and law, but I have never known peace. My world was a fortress, and I was its solitary guardian." He turned her gently to face him, his large hands cupping her face. The amber of his eyes glowed with the reflected moonlight. "Then you appeared, a stowaway in the dark. They saw silence and called it weakness. I saw a fortress of your own, one that had withstood a lifetime of siege. My soul recognized yours, Ilara. Its missing half." He lowered his head, his breath warm against her skin. "The mate bond is not a choice. It is a recognition. It is the universe declaring that two souls are one." He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, his touch undoing years of feeling worthless. "Every part of you they called a flaw. Your silence, your watchfulness, your quiet strength is what makes you perfect, what makes you my queen." Tears she hadn't known she was holding welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a shattering, overwhelming relief. This was real. This belonging was hers. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. Understanding her acceptance, he tilted his head, his gaze never leaving hers. He lowered his mouth to the sensitive skin of her neck, just below her ear. She felt the sharp prick of his canines, a brief clean sting that was not painful, but shockingly intimate. A surge of warmth, of pure energy flooded through her, a golden light that sealed every crack in her broken spirit. It was a claim, a promise, an unbreakable seal that bound them soul to soul. As he drew back, a delicate silver mark bloomed on her skin, a swirling pattern that seemed to shimmer with moonlight. He pressed a kiss to it, his lips gentle. The mark was not a brand of ownership, but a declaration of belonging. She was his, and he was hers. Here, under the gaze of the moon, the silent coin had finally been given a home, not as payment, but as the most sacred treasure in a king's entire world. The peace of the Black Moon Citadel was a living thing, a warm, breathing presence that had settled deep in Ilara's bones, chasing out the last of the Ashworth chill. It was shattered one morning by the urgent arrival of a scout, his wolf panting at his side, his face grim. He brought news that made the great hall fall silent. A human lord and his daughter, refugees from a border skirmish, were at the gates, begging for an audience with the Lycan king. Their name was Ashworth. A cold stillness settled over Ilara, but it was not the old, familiar fear. It was the calm of a frozen lake, solid and unyielding. Cale's hand found hers under the table, his grip a silent anchor. His amber eyes did not ask if she was afraid. They asked for her command. "Let them in," she said, her voice clear and steady, echoing with the authority she had never known she possessed. "Bring them to the throne room." They were led in like rats dragged from a sinking ship. Lord Ashworth's fine clothes were stained with mud and desperation. His face, once puffed with petty authority, was now gaunt and sallow. Cora, her legendary beauty soured by fear, clung to his arm, her eyes wide and searching. They saw the grandeur of the hall, the powerful Lycan warriors lining the walls, and the two figures on the twin thrones of obsidian and weirwood. They saw the ebony wolf, King Kyle, a terrifying mountain of muscle and scars. And beside him, they saw a woman. She wore a gown the color of midnight, adorned with silver that glittered like starlight. A delicate, shimmering mark, like a swirl of moonlight, graced the skin of her neck. Her posture was regal, her expression serene, her presence radiating a quiet power that seemed to hold the entire court in thrall. They did not recognize her. Lord Ashworth fell to his knees, his voice cracking. "Your Majesty," he pleaded, his eyes fixed on Cale. "My lands are besieged. The lord I was indebted to has turned on me. I beg for your protection, your armies." He trailed off, his words a pathetic litany of ruin. Kyle remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow and fury. He merely inclined his head, a slow, deliberate motion toward the woman at his side. "The affairs of human lords are the domain of my queen," he rumbled, his voice a low thunder that shook the very stones. "It is she you must petition." Lord Ashworth's gaze finally shifted to Ilara. His eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief warring with dawning, horrified recognition. Cora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This poised, radiant creature could not be the silent, worthless shadow they had cast aside. "Ilara," her father whispered, the name a ghost on his lips. Cora found her voice first, a desperate, syrupy plea. "Sister, thank the gods. You're alive. We must have your help. We are family." Ilara rose from her throne, her movements fluid and graceful. She descended the 2 steps to the main floor, the silence in the room so profound it was a physical pressure. She stopped a few feet from them, her gaze level and unnervingly calm. "Family," she repeated, the word tasting like ash. "I remember a conversation about family. It was a cold night. You were speaking to Cora, father. You believed I could not hear." She paused, her tapestry memory replaying the scene with perfect, brutal clarity. Her voice took on a distant, reciting quality. "It's a small sacrifice to ensure your brilliant future, my dear," she quoted, her eyes locking onto her sister's. "She will understand her purpose." She then turned her gaze back to her father. "I do understand my purpose now, and it has nothing to do with you." "Daughter, please!" he begged, scrambling forward, but 2 Lycan guards stepped in his path, their low growls a clear warning. "You must forgive an old man's desperation. We are your blood." "The daughter you speak of was a coin," Ilara said, her voice cutting through his pleas, each word a perfectly sharpened blade. "A payment to settle a debt. You spent her. She is gone." She looked past them, at the court that was now her true family, at the king who was the other half of her soul. "The person who stands before you is not a payment. She is a queen." She ascended back to her throne. It was Cale who delivered the final sentence, his voice devoid of all emotion, save for the cold, hard finality of law. "You have come to my lands seeking refuge from the consequences of your own cruelty. You will not find it here." He rose to his full, terrifying height, his shadow engulfing them. "You sold the greatest treasure this world has ever known for a pittance. Now you have nothing. You are banished. Leave my territory before the sun sets, and never return. Survive on your own." The Ashworths were dragged away, their pleas and cries swallowed by the closing of the great doors. A profound silence remained. Ilara did not feel joy, nor did she feel hatred. She felt empty. It was the clean, quiet emptiness of a wound that has finally, after a lifetime of pain, been cleansed and allowed to heal. She felt Kyle's hand cover hers, his warmth seeping into her, filling that new, peaceful space within her. Later that night, they stood on the high battlement where their bond had been sealed, the moon a brilliant silver disk in the sky. She leaned back against his solid chest, enveloped in his strength, in his scent of pine and winter. Her past was a distant country, its borders now closed to her forever. She was no longer a shadow, a whisper, a guarantee on a contract. She was the memory of a nation, the heart of a king, the queen of a people who saw her not as a burden, but as a blessing. She was home. The burden they cast aside now wore a crown.